All right. Hi, my name is Alan Latazzi. I first heard of social atomization as a dedicated term probably 2 years ago. I've since looked it up many times. I've been highly interested in the term itself, but I would like to rewind a little bit by saying that for maybe 5 years previous to that, I had been talking about something that had actually the entire time been social atomization. It had already been defined, I just didn't know it. So the issue to me is I would say personal. I would say that it's something that I actually focus on my daily life. And so what I would like to focus on really moving forward in this discussion is social atomization a wicked problem that we should even be focusing on and dealing with? Or is it a natural evolution of our current socioeconomic structure?
Hi, my name is Eric Slawick. I think that social atomization is actually a really good example of it's a really good test case for studying how issues can break along partisan lines because it's one of the more complex questions out there. It's not automatically as hyper polarized as a lot of other issues like climate change, immigration, the big issues. And so it is interesting to see what how your worldview and your ideology end up playing into your assumptions about it, or like he was suggesting, whether it even is a problem. And I actually also see it on what I do here as an unofficial missionary on a daily basis. I guess maybe after this, I'll probably notice it a little more, and the way that people are disconnected from everything, from religion, community, from critical thinking about larger issues. Not that they don't have critical thinking skills, all students have to in order to survive, but the idea of that being applied across the board is definitely diminished when you don't have contact with other people.
My name is Grant Klusman, and I would argue that social atomization as a general concept is an unavoidable ghost, essentially. Whether you are the most rugged of an individualist or the most ardent of a collectivist, because if you are someone who does live that kind of individualistic lifestyle and philosophy where you avoid any kind of label or any kind of categorization. That is by definition social atomization in the sense that you are looking out for your own interests in the most literal of senses. However, one can also look at it if someone is as collectivist as they come, where that stems from an individual interest that someone is acting on, but they have now congregated with other people who share that same interest as them, and thus we have collectives of sorts arise. It just happens that that self interest is shared.
Hi, my name is Gray O'Leary Hasmonic, and I think that social media plays a huge role in social atomization. I have noticed personally before, during, and after the pandemic that I have had boundless opportunities to connect with my peers, friends, and family over social media, but it just has seemed not organic. It just hasn't happened, but yet we choose to spend time looking at our phones constantly, distancing ourselves. Even now, when the world is slowly coming back to normal, I think that we just have lost a sense of community, a lost of sense of ourselves, and I feel like we need to desperately gain that back.
So to Gray's point about social media presence and how it can lead to kind of what I was hearing was almost a loss of communication, but especially I would imagine a loss of connection. That's what people normally talk about, and especially authentic connection with other people. This quote that I read a while back has stuck with me for a while, that we have more communication means of communication than we've ever had, and less communicability than we've ever had. And it sticks with me because we are advancing as a society at a rapid pace, and yet we have found that that we have more means to I don't start a group. We could start a group right now. We could be the next big group, and yet there is a loss of follow through. There is a loss of congruency of what those groups might mean. There's fragmentation. And I think that it's so multifaceted. I mean, people can move easier than they've ever been able to move. It's actually so easy with modern technology to simply not answer somebody. They're not standing in front of you. So I guess I would like to wrap this up with saying that I think that there is going to be an ebb and flow. I think that we're going to recognize this issue, and we're going to continue dealing with it. And it might not even be head on. We might not even be directly recognizing it. It might be inadvertent. But for instance, what I'm getting at, I was just having this discussion recently. I used to sell shoes. I love shoes. I could tell you way too much about them. And the shoe industry has changed immensely. You can buy all your shoes online, right? It's cheaper to buy them online, as with most things. But at the end of the day, every now and then, you're going to find that your online experience is not good enough for something as personable to your foot and your body as shoes. And you're going to have a brick and mortar store at some point, and you're going to have to go in. And in that moment, there is a salesperson who knows that there is a power in face-to-face interaction, that there is something about it that they are able to communicate with you on a different level than we have through virtual presence. And in those moments, we bridge gaps. And I guess that's kind of what I take away with this, is that as we continue pushing towards this further divide from social atomization, I think that there's going to be a pushback. Just don't know what it'll look like.
I actually wanted to build off of points that both of you were making, and this can maybe seem like an extreme example, but I think studying the extremes can be very helpful, because you see a phenomenon in like its purest form, and then you can kind of work backwards. When Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, was in the buildup to his current invasion of Ukraine, by the time he made that decision, he had basically become the ultimate example of social atomization. He was one man. If you've seen the video of the infamous National Security Council meeting, he's like literally he's over here, and his advisors are at a table like 30 feet away. And all throughout COVID, he had these ridiculous security procedures that people couldn't enter without being sprayed with chemicals. And so he became the ultimate example of an atomized human being who had nothing but his own ideology stewing and building and building and building. And by the time he was ready to make this, world-changing decision that's going to probably realign the whole geostrategic arrangement of most of the world, he wasn't listening to anyone. He was only hearing what he wanted to hear. And that's an extreme example. But I think it happens in our politics too, where social media, like you're saying, especially, it's supposed to make communication more fluid, but it actually ends up reinforcing the tribalism, because it's so easy to get across these 128 character sound bites, or 256 characters now, and to speak only to your tribe, and to put out misinformation from right or left or center or wherever. And we're not necessarily going to start a war that changes the world as a result of this, but we're certainly going to further feed into the catastrophic divisions that the society has collapsed into over time. So,
thank you. I must say that while I do find it very pertinent that you do mention Putin as an example of social atomization personified. I will say though that um, this being the result of COVID, by my assessment anyway, I would not say that that is really causing this kind of social atomization, what we see in tyrants. Typically, when it comes down to despots in an authoritarian structure, it's like I said with collectivism, where people are motivated by their self-interests, whether it does come with joining a group identity or not. Typically, authoritarianism comes in the form of extreme collectivism. One counselor, one to rule over the masses. If we were looking at Russia in particular, Putin throughout his entire tenure as leading Russia has been a tyrannical leader. He has been accused of launching false flag attacks against his own civilians to justify wars in, for example, Chechnya, Georgia, etc. And It was during the lead up to the start of his leadership with Soviet era nostalgia running high that people turned to a leader like Putin, who they believed could fix a lot of the problems with corruption and economic downturn post the collapse of the Iron Curtain. Now, these, what I'm mentioning, are examples of people's shared interests at that time, specific to the Russian Federation, as these were a people who, I mean, if you were an average Russian at that time, you most likely lived a more impoverished lifestyle than the average American or Englishman or you name it. And not only that, but there was severe weakening in the military. Organized crime was a serious issue to contend with, to the point where Russia was fast becoming an oligarchy. And with this, people in times of crisis like these turn to what is sometimes been termed God men, or men who foment a cult of personality, where they, in the name of installing the big brother government that they desire, they'll promise the masses loads of things, whether or not they come true or not. Some of them may come true, not all of them, because the ultimate end game is power. Now, if they solve some of these issues upon coming to power, it does have the added effect of meaning that in the eyes of the people that they rule over, they're more likely to not overthrow these kinds of despots. You can instill a sense of gratitude, which we've seen Putin, in all fairness, do in some respects.
Do you think this ties back into the topic of social atomization, in that post-Soviet era people, and specifically the Russian Federation, were so atomized because their entire world of previously established social institutions that had been in place for half a century were just gone, and because of that atomization, people, not only just because of like socioeconomic reasons, but because of those atomization reasons, turned to a leader like that because they gave them a sense of community.
Well, not only did it give a sense of community, an ultra-nationalistic figure like Putin, but also the fact that he promised to solve a lot of the issues that were illing Russia at that time. A shared interest of everyone was beating things like poverty, as Russia is runs a conscript military, I should say. The strengthening of that military, and by extension, the protection of Russia's territorial sovereignty, is something that had appealed to many Russians at that time. And this transcends to any kind of government that's in which a cult of personality is being fomented or constructed in any way. But I would say that to wind up this kind of the topic of social atomization as it relates to Putin in particular, I think it has less to do with COVID specifically, and more you're looking at the overall career of a tyrant, much like other tyrants, who has built his career off of appealing to people's anxieties and interests. It just happens to be shared in this case.
So I have a very different talking point to present. So something that I've noticed, can I say that as an educator? Can I throw that out there? Okay, great. As someone who is a student teacher at the moment, who's an educator, something that I've seen not only within the students that I teach, but really, I mean, harking back to social media once again, is we are dying to be individuals and we are dying to be extremely unique. For instance, I can even, relate this to how children identify concerning gender or what sex they choose to identify with. I think that there's a lot of kids who are beginning to question their sexuality, their orientation, who they, might choose to pursue romantically or otherwise. And for example, I had a friend who has children, and her daughter came out to her as bisexual. And she said, well, now what are my pronouns? And it's like, well, if you still identify as female, but what my friend said is that I could tell that my daughter wanted like the they them pronouns. And I've been seeing this as a trend not only within the children that I know and teach, but within people, especially over social media, is that we are dying to be so individualistic, so unique, that we almost purposely isolate ourselves from the general mainstream society as a whole. I feel like aside from just gender identity, there's so many different niche aspects of a person, and there's so much intersectionality there. But I feel like people are dying to be unique, dying to be different. And I think what people fail to see is that when you go to such lengths to try and define yourself in any way, shape, or form, that actually can really turn to being isolating. And I think, like, as someone who's not religious, but I do see the religious standpoint from it being that, well, people moving away from religion or moving away from spirituality, that's a huge sense of community that a lot of people hold near and dear. And I feel like as people move away from those things, that can also be a factor into social atomization. So I think it's a multifaceted issue. I think that it's a complex one, as it was previously stated. And I think that there's a lot more that we can do to learn about it and to understand it. And that either way, I think that it's happening. It's just, how is that ebb and flow going to occur? Are we going to actually realize that, is this an issue? Are we seeing that we've become more isolated because we've chosen not to interact with those around us, or we've, chosen to move away from different organizations that we were once part of? And I think that we'll just have to truly wait and see. But it definitely is something that's concerning.
So I'd like to kind of maybe wrap some of this together, because I think we've all made some pretty interesting points here. So you've talked about collectivism versus, what did you call it? Rugged isolationism?
Rugged individualism.
That's it. And I think that it's fairly, I don't want to say easy, but I think many people could understand how rugged individualism can absolutely be attributed to much of the American history, right? The Great West and us finding new frontiers and all this. But this is obviously carried into our current politics and our political structure. And one of this report that I read a while back that stuck with me is interviewing Americans versus some other developed nations on what they believe got them to be successful, to be where they are today. And many Americans said, well, hard work, of course, individual hard work. Whereas many Europeans said, well, teamwork, I had a lot of help. So it's a very interesting thing. This is something that is almost uniquely American. What I also think is interesting is that America is one of the few developed nations with a presidential system. And actually, if you were to bring that question back to developing nations that are not tyrannical, for instance, then you would find similar answers. And I do want to step away from that a tiny bit, though. So you were talking about Putin sitting at one side of the table with many people away from him, and you said something that stuck out to me. And I kind of hear a little bit of it elsewhere as well. I believe that we are curating our lives. I believe that we're able today to curate our lives around our interests. So you say that we're all acting out of self-interest until we maybe form a group where we can start working on collective interests. And absolutely, I mean, that's kind of been the history of humans, right? And you mentioned tribalism. Well, tribalism starts with a group of 20 people, and then it kind of grows from there. And now we have like thousands and thousands and millions of people in these tribes. But at the core of it, we have these unique little properties of ourselves, and in our current world, we have the ability to curate what we want out of what is available. It's not just that there's 3 channels where you can watch the news anymore. No. You can get your news source from hundreds of places, of possibly dubious origins. And you can believe that as your worldview because you have the ability to curate that for yourself. You can also curate your sexual orientation. You can curate the way that your room looks. You can curate the level of aristocracy that you believe that you're living or not. Everything can be curated to your desire to a reasonable extent, especially if you have the money. And as we do this, we push ourselves, as you said, into these further polarized areas. Now, what I think is kind of interesting is we've been talking about all this as people who are uniquely separating themselves from other people, and yet we have 2 major political camps that are entirely polarized. So there's got to be this thing that happens where you try to create this unique being, this very specialized character of you, and in so doing, you actually find danger, right? Because to be counterculture is dangerous. You are taking on the entire world when you are counterculture. And once you do that, while you are dying to be unique, you are also dying to be loved and accepted and heard. And you can't be heard if you are standing alone on a mountaintop. And so you look for the collective. And I believe that that might kind of somewhat lead to these tribes that are still ever present, right? How are we ever going to get rid of tribalism? It's might be in our innate biological selves. I don't know if I really have a solid thought with all of that that we can build on, but that's just my digestion of what we've all said so far.
Or Grant, you want to go?
If you don't mind,
I'll
Play rock, paper, scissors,
I have another idea to start.
Yeah, when you guys both want to go, ask each other, is it a response or is it switching to something new? And then we'll go with the response first.
Okay.
Sure. So to the point that you made, where the hyper-polarized nature of the rhetoric itself surrounding our political system, I believe that it both simultaneously enforces the notion of social atomization, but in ways that one wouldn't expect, and what some might even call contradictory. In the sense that, yes, much of the news coverage surrounding the political parties themselves is of a very polarized nature, but I think this might have more to do with the kind of news people flock to, in part because they're following their own interests and the reality that they wish to believe. However, when one actually looks deeper into the way that the political parties function, one will actually find that it is not as polarized as the media has made it appear as it may be. And a lot of this can be chalked up to the fact that both of our political parties, the 2 major ones, as part of this 2-party system here in the United States of America, are often in bed with one another in terms of the goals that they're pursuing. Both are deeply in the pockets of the military-industrial complex. Both the establishments of both have pursued belligerent interventionist foreign policy, and both have had, to varying degrees, different parts to play in the stifling of civil liberties here in the United States of America. But while that might downplay, one might think that might downplay the notion of social atomization if our parties really aren't that much similar. The fact that we have such such fierce rhetoric surrounding the political debate also reinforces it, and I think that's where most of this atomization is coming from, because of constructed realities enforced by a media that quite frankly, to boost its ratings, takes part in a lot of these loads of promises with what one candidate or the other might promise. Eric, you went before.
Yeah, I have a response.
She has a response.
Oh.
I have no idea.
It's all right, we'll get it eventually.
I got confused.
Yeah, so to talk to the general talking point about political parties and party lines and polarization, I think that they're way ahead of us than we actually would think. And I think that it's pretty obvious to argue that point because essentially no matter how individualistic or how niche you have crafted and curated your character, as you said, at the end of the day, I mean, it's kind of like, oh, it's time to vote again. You know, who am I going to vote for, A or B? Well, A and B candidates are very, very acutely aware of what their constituents want, and they are going to appeal with their policies and with what they say. Now, whether or not that actually manifests is a whole different story. We've seen how that works out time and time again. But simply just by saying, oh, I support this group or I don't support that group, right there, you're just gaining votes. I mean, F the actual political, policies, if you're just simply appealing to voters on very emotional issues, truly. And I mean, I think that is genuinely what drives a lot of voters to actually go vote, what actually gets feet on the ground to, polling booths is actually how they feel about certain issues. I lost my train of thought a little bit there. Shoot, I was going to say something else that was really good. Oh, yeah, actually, one thing that I heard recently by a very popular talk show host whose name rhymes with Sven Napiro, would be that it was said that it wouldn't be a surprise if a large wave of young conservatives came of this era, simply because the left side of our political party has really appealed to a lot of far left views, and a lot of people who are dead in the middle truly just feel left behind. And I can't speak for anyone, but I will speak for myself to say, yeah, I think that our parties have shifted in a way that makes us feel very further isolated, further contributing to social atomization, because now people who maybe a year or two ago or 3 or 10 ago felt that they really did align with a certain political party, they just feel like it's been turned on its head. And now, well, where do we go? So I think that further, just within our political parties and our political system, is just further social atomization.
So this is kind of both building and shifting to a new point. And I kind of wanted to say something about the real person versus what you might call the theatrical person. And this is especially a problem on social media. That's the prime culprit where you can customize the way that you look to the world. And you can be the most miserable person in the world, but you can post nothing but pictures of yourself having fun. And you can, it gets extreme sometimes. I've heard extreme stories of people attempting to impersonate things that they're not, with consequences that can range from the humorous to the catastrophic. But it from what I understand, it creates a lot of issues all across the board. It's like I've heard that young girls a lot end up having a lot of image issues because their friends are they're all projecting that theatrical version of themselves, and then they all are jealous of each other, and they're all feeling that they're not meeting this artificial standard it's not a real standard. No one's actually like this in the real world. It's like almost like digital makeup. And then for men, I heard a theory that a lot of the mass shooter incidents can actually, this plays a role in it, because again, they all are looking at the perfect lives that they think everyone else is living, and they're getting angrier and angrier and more bitter and more jealous and feeling more isolated. And that's, again, kind of like Putin. That's obviously an extreme example of social atomization. But if I were going to make a case that it's mostly a bad thing, I would probably go to something like that, where it's like the most atomized of all people can be so contained within their own internal personal flaws and psychological weaknesses that they can just stew until they lose control. So.
Well, to your last point about making an argument for it to be a negative thing to have social atomization, I think it's really difficult for me to think that it could be a positive thing, even though I said that it might be a natural evolution of our current culture. Who was it that said that it's poor health to be well adjusted to a sick society? The reality is we as humans are a very social creature. We are evolved from a level of sociality that is actually very unusual in the animal kingdom, and as such, it seems pretty simple to me that continuing that communication and continuing that sense of community is one of the key facets of being human. And what I guess I would say, just to round that out, is there are few animals on this planet that are truly unable to have offspring that can't make it on their own, that have to be raised for a designated and extended amount of time. I mean, sure, you've got animals as small as spiders that rely on their mother's back as it carries them around and stuff like that. We all have these examples, but my point is, it takes us like 18 years. It's pretty significant when you compare this to the rest of the animal kingdom. So we need this sociality, and we only have very few examples of humans that have been left without human guidance from an adult figure that have made it into adulthood. And if they do, it is a case that we would say is far from desirable for them or for us. So I just want to throw that out there right away. I think social atomization is a huge problem. I think we should be working on it, even though it might be a natural occurring problem in our current society. But I wanted to say a little bit about the polarization that you two talked about. So I agree. I think that social atomization and polarization actually kind of feed off of each other for a while, and I know that's not necessarily what you guys are saying, but that's how I would like to round it out. Now, you mentioned kind of the centrism of our parties. Absolutely. I mean, if you were to label the Democratic Party, you're talking about a center-left party in most other nations. If you were to talk about the Republican Party until very recently, you're talking about a center-right party. And they have to maintain that to some degree, or at least they have had to maintain that to some degree, because otherwise they would isolate a lot of their voter base. So my argument is the two-party system itself actually helps create social atomization. There are many voices that wish to be heard, and you were saying that the center-left Democrats are the ones that are struggling to be heard right now. I would immediately argue that all the voices are struggling to be heard right now. If you are far left, you're going to say that there's no way that Joe Biden is far enough left to hear me. If you are far right, you finally have a candidate that is getting somewhere, and also he is being criticized in every corner of America. And so when you think about these voices, they are all going to struggle to be heard until there is adequate representation for each of them. Obviously, I am saying all of this to acknowledge that proportional representation is a thing in most other developed countries. It could be a thing here, and it would definitely help to not absolve, but at least to answer to this issue. Again, it doesn't solve it. Supermajorities still have, coalitions still have to be made in such a circumstance, but at least some of these fringe people will feel that that they have some representation.
All right, guys, so I think we hit on a good point there. We're going to go to break now, and then when we come back, I think we've already established that the idea that social atomization is a negative, so then I want to talk about what's causing it.
So as far as what the causes of social atomization are, in basic terms, we could go basically off of the definition of it, where it is simply put the pursuit of one's own self-interest. But to get deeper into it, we've brought up social media a lot within this conversation so far, which, if we're talking specific to the 21st century, absolutely. But I also think it stems from increasing chasing of basically this chasing this dragon, this non-existent ideal, or at least I shouldn't say non-existent, but not existent in the way people wish it to be, where they pursue some kind of, whether it be ideology or philosophy, with this kind of end goal in mind, uh, unaware though that whatever affiliation they may choose, it's won't fulfill all of their wants and needs. And so there's this kind of disheartening of the masses with respect to, again, political factionalism or affiliation or parties or what have you, where there is this kind of bitterness and resentment in which the people feel they're not heard, and so they retreat into some kind of an echo chamber. This could exist on social media, organizations, you name it. And yeah, I mean, I think it stems from essentially dissatisfaction.
I'd like to reply. I don't have the same definition of social atomization. I think you might actually be right about what the definition is, but it's not my interpretation of it, and I don't think that it's how it's currently being used on its most prolific stage. And why I would go as far as to disagree is pursuing your own self-interest is it's great. I mean, Thomas Hobbes speaks about, basically accruing power in many different senses that you can, and how obviously the accruing of your own power is of your own self-interest. But you specifically mentioned earlier how your self-interest can then collectivize, and through that collective assortment, you would be truly fighting social atomization, right? So I see social atomization not as the pursuit of your self-interest, but of the either sole pursuit of your self-interest, or really, ultimately, just the isolation of yourself from others. That's really, to me, that's the more basic definition of it, is the isolation of yourself from others. And once you start going into that direction, I think that the causes of it, the where it came from, might be a little different. Now, if I were to use self-interest, I would probably go back to, I don't know, Adam Smith, the man, the prodigy. If we are to say, I'm a tradesman, I have been, or I'm an artisan, I've been making these ceramic pots my entire life, but in the feudal system it is taken from me. Don't really like that very much. I'd rather sell them myself. That is pursuing your own self-interest. And honestly, this all makes sense to me. Social atomization didn't start as a problem right then and there, although I do believe that we can start seeing the entrances of it. Before this time, we had a reliance on power positions, people in power, that superseded our ability to go it on our own for most humans that existed on the planet. So you either relied on the village or the familial system that you knew, but in those days it did take a village to raise a human. It was a very different system. In today's world, we have in the last 100 years transitioned not just from a village raising a human, but say a multi-generational family. And then from a multi-generational family, we transitioned to a nuclear family. And from a nuclear family, we've now transitioned to a divorced family. Or is there a family, or are we even raising children? This is no longer the goal for most people. The movement of antinatalism is bold, and it is growing. So this level of human isolationism, where we have gone from building these huge houses where servants would live in the same house to getting one-bedroom apartments or studios in massively urbanized places. This is a new thing. Does it stem from Adam Smith? Does it stem from something else? That's a discussion I would love to have, and if it does stem from Adam Smith, then maybe it really might be about self-interest as it is, but I think it's really about isolationism.
Yeah, I think that was a good transition away from talking about social media, and you guys can still bring points on that up, but I think what Alan has brought in is like the potential cause of the decline of traditional social institutions. You specifically talk about the village and the family. But if you guys want to play off that as well, as well as other things, organized religion, something as well, men's clubs, things like that.
Yeah, you brought up organized religion and clubs earlier. I definitely.
Yes.
What was that?
That was me.
Oh.
I'm over here too,
I asked because I don't want to be taking credit.
I do probably have an ambiguous point.
Yeah.
I don't know if
But
this really.
Eric, I think you wanted to respond.
Yeah. To build off of that point about traditional versus modern institutions, I think it's important to neither overly denigrate nor overly idealize the past. And I think that, the harmful extremes we've been talking about of individualism that we're seeing today are certainly bad, but to live in a time and a place where you had no personal identity apart from being a member of the nation or the community or the household, I don't think that was terribly healthy either. And I think the challenge for us tonight and just for society in general is how do we do both? Because identity politics is kind of the currency of our entire culture today, and it's left and right. Everyone is becoming about what oppressed group they identify themselves as part of, and if there's anything that could lead to more atomization, it would be hard to think of, because tribal factionalism by definition is combative. It's seeking to rip something apart. So
I would say that with regards to the balance of individualism with that kind of collective not really having an identity, I would say that when we do see that kind of lack of an identity, that's not necessarily that kind of authoritarianism of dangerous extremes. It's not so much stemming merely from social atomization itself. It's more or less the subversion of it. As you have people that I mentioned this earlier, where they all have their self-interest, but it's a shared self-interest. It's during that time of desperation, then, that people look to some kind of cult of personality to keep it together, and in that kind of fervor, people inevitably lose their individuality when there's that kind of glue keeping it together is a tyrannical force. That's how we see the rise of things like fascism, or Bolshevism, or any kind of totalitarian ideology. It's essentially the pursuit of self-interest to such an extent that that kind of anxiety based on pursuing it leads to the erasure of everything else, and by the end there only exists that kind of groupthink mentality.
So I know we've definitely addressed social media as being, a key issue concerning social atomization. I mean, I'm 21. That's the lens I'm going to see it through best, because social media is largely part of my world. But something else that two major factors, going back to what Alan was saying, considering the nuclear family, I think that once again, the pandemic has largely brought that upon us. We, during the pandemic, learned to be very self-sufficient. We learned to avoid people. I mean, that is a learned behavior. I have two younger or second cousins, I suppose, who are 5 and 8, and my 8-year-old second cousin has anxiety about going anywhere, even if it's to friends' houses, and he can't even pinpoint why, but it's because we have created this sort of hyper-nuclearized family, if you will, because we taught our children, and I mean, it was inevitable, that outside is scary, that we have to avoid one another, that we can't have these sort of social interactions like we used to. And psychologically speaking, I think that we have really bred a generation that might be socially adverse, because from an educator's standpoint, those really crucial defining years of your life where you learn how to socialize, where you learn how to interact with one another, if you take those really formative experiences away, and there have been some, going back to a very polar example, but if you go to some very polar examples where children and young people have been entirely isolated from other people, it's detrimental linguistically, it's detrimental mentally, in all sorts of ways. Something else that I think might be inadvertent that's contributing to this is the fact that we've largely automated our society. When you go to the grocery store, you can plug in your phone into earbuds. You can go through a self-checkout. Unless you need to get something from the deli, but that's becoming self-serve at this point. You can truly exist and operate in society without existing and operating in society. And I think that that's the caveat, and that's kind of the dichotomy that we're facing here is we are people in a society, but we are losing ourselves within our society. We're not being present when we actually go out and interact with the world. We prefer to stay closed off. And whether or not the pandemic has affected that or not, I think this has probably been something that's long coming. However, with the pandemic, I think that we've seen it accelerated tremendously.
Yeah, so I like more of where you ended, because I definitely believe that the foundations of social atomization were here well before the pandemic, but I do believe that the kind of this social polarization, this social atomization, I believe that was definitely exasperated by it. And what's interesting is that, as you said, we learned that we can exist without other people, that we can do this and be almost rugged individualistic about it. And also, interestingly enough, America can't. There were other countries that successfully almost dodged the pandemic for all of its real horrors, right? And they were countries that actually took isolation as a protocol to be held into account. These are countries like South Korea, New Zealand. Their government said this is what we need to do, and obviously there are some other things that they did as well. They had testing that was beyond the norm, but ultimately they had a prepared plan of how to deal with this. One of the other things that you were hitting on, though, is this fear of even interacting to begin with. This is, to me, one of the scariest parts of social atomization, especially as an extrovert. I wonder if I'm if I'm being crowded out here. If we lose the ability to even fundamentally speak with each other and connect on these highly personable levels that we used to have, then all this talk of Adam Smith and the real histories of it doesn't matter. We'll have our heads in books and our own curated little bubble worlds, and I believe that can be incredibly scary. You bring up headphones, you can have. I have literally lost myself in song before with headphones in. We can create ambient noise that comes from such different sides. There's this song by Discovery, and it actually sounds like there are these different creatures coming from like 8 different places around your head at once. It is phenomenal, and also it's an entire escape. So, does social atomization have a connection to severe escapism? Because we definitely have escapism, right? And I've tried challenging people on this before. Do you play video games because you wish to escape? Well, no, is the usual answer. But I actually think that these people just haven't thought about it. Do you listen to music? Do you consume a movie that was built to show you a different world than what you are currently living, to show you a different language, to... we have pictures when we open up our computers of places all around the world. We are less and less able to even travel to those places as we have more ability to do so physically. But monetarily, we're less and less able to do so. And so this is kind of what I was talking about in the very beginning of this ebb and flow of social atomization. As we see these issues rear their heads, do we do we call upon some knights to slash the dragon down? Has that alarm been sounded? Does the village even know that the dragon exists? Or is it limited to just a few people that, sitting in universities? I don't know.
To build off of that, actually that COVID point you made about the societies that were able to dodge it, because I've heard a lot about that too, and it does seem, I think this is a perfect example of the real trade-offs from any, I don't believe there's a simple answer or solution to this problem. I think anywhere it's a spectrum of possible solutions, and every one of them is going to have advantages and every one of them is going to have disadvantages. To take South Korea, for example, I know I've seen that they, for the most part, they were at the head of the pack when it came to COVID containment. But I think, a mere 20 miles to the north of Seoul, we see how that same collectivistic culture that allowed South Korea to effectively act collectively in order to function almost as an organic unit in response to this disease. Just go 20 miles north across that border and you see how this collectivism can take the darkest form imaginable, where they were the same people just 75 years ago, and they have that common culture. And when you had a totalitarian system imposed upon them, it took very naturally, because they are a hierarchical society, and they are this isn't any statement about people, innately, or cultures innately, just to say that I think that collectivistic cultures are better. They can be much more efficient, and they can have physical benefits like fighting disease or mobilizing to fight a depression or something like that. But they are much more prone to collapse into totalitarianism.
And to that point about the merits of that kind of individualistic, looking out for oneself versus the collectivist mindset, this kind of loops back to the idea, the very character of social atomization itself, and that is that it is a faceless attitude where there are the merits of having a population that is free to decide what their priorities are, how they may go about it, provided, assuming it's within the confines of the laws of that given society. And juxtapose that with a kind of collectivist mentality where they're, culturally, the self is not prioritized. It ultimately, it depends on the culture and how it manages the character of social atomization itself, for it to go down, for us to have a good judgment on whether or not it is this net negative or net positive.
I think that, to go off of Eric's point, I think that it is very true to say that societies that have a more collective sort of mindset certainly are more prone to fall into that totalitarianism. For instance, you see something like China, which is hugely, it's communistic, it's hugely the others, and including yourself, over just yourself. And well, you see how the government operates there. And I think a good example of this, to scale it back to a more micro level, is simply just COVID policies and COVID mask mandates and vaccine mandates. And while at the beginning of this, I think that largely a lot of people could say, yes, we need to be masking up frequently. It needs to be mandated. It has to happen. Vaccines, even, they have to be, this, that, and the third. I think that a lot of people have shifted their thoughts throughout this entire global event, whereas some people I personally know who were very much in support of these sort of collectivism ideas, such as we must do this for the greater good of everyone else. But I think a lot of people then fail to see the detriment that caused themselves, their own individualism, their own right to self-govern and be autonomous. And I think that now that COVID is hopefully, knock on wood, right, backing off a little bit. We are kind of coming out of this tunnel finally. I think that people are maybe being a little bit more introspective and retrospective and seeing how supporting such totalitarianism can actually be very detrimental. And that when it's great when the government agrees with you with your policies and your ideas, and until it doesn't. And if you give the government so much power in these sort of cases, then what you want is no longer what your government is doing. I think that's where you really fall into that rabbit hole of like, well, you push for this collectivism and against this individualism, and now here we are. So I think that in a lot of ways, I mean, maybe some could say social atomization has its pros, but I think that we are largely, because of the world we live in, we see its cons.
I think that there's two major types of collectivism, at least. In America, we couldn't have become the United States if we didn't have collectivism, right? So you were speaking of a balance earlier. Couldn't agree more. We've got to have a balance of this individualism, this collectivism. Otherwise, we're going to have this, the feudalism that I talked about earlier that you said could really have some bad effects. Couldn't agree more. Also, the severe collectivism that leads to authoritarian rule obviously takes away from the liberal attitudes and the democratic attitudes that people might naturally wish to pursue. However, it's not just authoritarianism that collectivism comes from. There are many Western European countries that we seem to be kind of overlooking through this entire conversation that agrees on a different level of collectivism. It's not even just that they're agreeing how they should be led by the government, but it's actually that they're agreeing that their wealth or what they contribute to society be redistributed in a different way that is more collective in nature. And what I think is interesting about America is that our rugged individualism has time and time again prevented us from making that step. And that's not to say that rugged individualism is necessarily a bad thing on its face. But when you have so many voices that all wish to have their unique opinions heard, it is very difficult for a government to take all of those voices and do something with it, especially if all of those voices are not represented properly. And so we're going to, I guess what I'm most curious about with this entire round, this last round of chatter, is can we connect social atomization to the political structures that are overlooking the society that is being studied? So
yeah, all right, so we're kind of coming on to like the next thing I want to talk about, so we're going to go to break again for a little bit because we need to change the batteries, but when we come back, I want to talk about how things like the economic system and consumerism kind of play into this, and then we'll talk about potential solutions or mitigations to the problem of social atomization, because I feel like we're naturally kind of heading in that way anyway.
Great.
So, with regards to the question of whether or not social atomization affects things like consumerism, economics, and anything of that nature,
or is caused by?
Yes. Well, I think we see, if anything, we see the effects of it played out in everyday marketing. You know, the term, this might be kind of cliche, but woke marketing is a semi-in vogue term to describe anything that's marketed at a consumer to appeal to a sense of identity specifically. I remember very distinctly in 2020 with the social unrest that was unfolding around us in the wake of George Floyd's passing. A lot of companies went out of their way to advertise Black Lives Matter essentially like a brand to appeal to people who might be of that kind of persuasion. And I think that as far as the effects of it, there's varying degrees. There are times when it's simple pandering, where it might be underhanded, it's just that. And it can be used in nefarious ways, as we've seen time and time again, where it can transcend, under certain circumstances, into such thing as propaganda, to advertise some kind of messaging, and typically this would come in the form of an us versus them mentality, which is really the ideology of fascism when you're referring to that kind of in-group versus out-group.
I'm sorry to jump you guys, but I take it a little differently. When I think of if social atomization does have a connection, whether it's whichever starts first, to economies at scale, my immediate tie is neoliberalism. So if you think about how our current market structure works, we are rewarding individual market players, CEOs, business leaders, whatever you want to call them, to such a degree of individualism, and also at such a level of hyper competition, that it almost breeds social atomization. This is a market system that is built off of literally destroying competition until it doesn't exist, so that you can then create your own unit of control, and maybe only then, you split it up into also separate entities. So a reasonable example would be the car industry. What the car industry would love to do is not take out all the options that are available for you to purchase cars. They know that consumers have a vast variety of interests. What they would rather do is either buy up the market share of other car companies, or actually within one singular company create sub-companies that they can then sell sub-models inside of, so that we can all feel like we are getting a unique product, while at the end of the day we are all actually pooling our resources into the same singular resource. And this goes on and on in almost every single industry that we can imagine, and it goes on beyond business, right? It goes into the power structures of geopolitical politics. So when we wonder if there's any justification that we can possibly have for Putin invading Ukraine, his major fear that he has gone back to time and time again is the conglomeration of power behind the North American, what is it, transatlantic organization? What is this? Thank you. Yeah. So this is actually a very dangerous power when you think about it on its head. This alliance would be really the largest, I think it would be the largest empire force on the planet, if you were to look at it that way. And just because we don't share the same overall representative, I think we've all in the United States of America heard that the president is the most powerful person in the world. Whether we believe that or not, it's a statement that we believe we can make and stand behind. So when you think about this, we have this collection of power into these small groups, and from there you have this scattering into the way that we, I guess, separate those powers. And this leads to a balance of this individualism that we think that we can have, while at the same time, creating a system that perpetuates it.
If you want to speak first.
Do you have a direct response point? Because I have something that kind of complements.
I have a response as well, but I'd let you go first.
Okay. I think that if we go to an example of corporate marketing manipulation that we would probably all agree is bad, I would take the classic, and to show how long of a pedigree this problem has in American society, I would take the classic example of tobacco, where honestly, everything you guys were saying is kind of wrapped up in this, where back in the 50s, granted, it was before it was widely known how dangerous cigarettes are, but it wasn't too long before a lot of that data was purposely shelved and hidden from the public. And the means by which they, both before and after the science had caught up with reality, they had images like Joe Camel and beautiful women models on magazine covers smoking. And it's like, where's the connection here? Like, logically, where's the connection? What does being young and beautiful have to do with smoking a cigarette? But it creates that image. I think it comes from our individualism, our individualistic heritage, in a sense, where it's like I'm the cool person. I'm the person who is adept at embodying the values of this society. And it worked extremely well. You watch movies from the 50s, so I hear, and everyone's smoking. And it became this mutually reinforcing culture where it's this really perverse blend of collectivism and individualism, or almost individualism leading to collectivism. And it's still with us, to get to what you were saying about how you go to a Walgreens or a Pick and Save, and there are 100 different kinds of cigarettes. Even though there are warnings on all of them saying, Surgeon General says, lung cancer, bad, really bad. We don't sell it to minors anymore because we all know it's bad, but we still allow this thing to fester. And it's just, in my mind, it's a perfect example of this almost schizophrenic sort of thing America's had going on, where we can't decide which of our values or value systems is going to win out, and the result is policy that's just haphazard and chaotic.
So, to both of your points, you mentioned the role of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization with regards to the current crisis in Eastern Europe. I would say that this serves as an example of, this is on an international level, of the dangers of when individual interests are not pursued, because one might argue that international treaties like that of NATO, some have argued the United Nations, in many ways undermine individual nations and their security, in that they're now similar to the causations of World War I, where tangles of alliances, if one nation, which we could scale that down to the individual level, misbehaves in some way, some kind of transgression on another, you have all this pile on, and it leads to a spider web of complications with regards to everyone's relation to one another, and it causes sides to be pitted against one another when this could have been handled on such a smaller scale. This might loop back to tie this in with somewhat of a response / something complementary to what Eric said, where Eric mentioned that with the cigarette ads, that it's almost like a case of people being so individualistic that it's almost becomes collectivist in nature. This is the idea that the mere pursuit of individual interests, by definition, social atomization, is not necessarily, at least in my view, a net negative if limited to that. The problem is when it becomes perverted, or it becomes subverted into becoming something other than that, where people are paralyzed so much by their own fear that they wish to pursue some kind of a common interest, and it gets hijacked by some kind of a cult of personality, leading them towards that ulterior motive by piggybacking off of those kinds of fears that people share, which could be very legitimate for all we know. I mean, a historical example one might use would be Weimar Germany post-World War I. with a castrated military, land stripped from Germany, Allied forces outright occupying land, and an economy in shambles. People had very legitimate grievances about their own national security. This was not only a collective interest, but also an individual interest that happened to be shared by the masses. Now, I think we could look back in hindsight looking at these concerns, which many would argue are legitimate. I mean, think if this happened in America, that we wouldn't look down on Germany in the interwar period and during the Second World War with so much scorn. However, very infamously, as we all know, this kind of fear gave way to the rise of the cult of personality that was Hitler and the Nazi Party, and leading to the atrocities that we all know of. And what was Hitler in part a product of? It was the over pursuit of these kinds of personal interests that people held, to the point where it could be subverted and people could be legitimately blinded and indoctrinated to this kind of the pursuit of such atrocious goals as that of Hitler's and his Nazis.
So to completely stray away from that point, but to tie it back to what Alan was saying about the trying to find a common identity, I think by trying to isolate and atomize yourself, like for instance, I mean, with Toyota, there's Lexus. So you have people who, buy a Lexus because it's the fancier car, it's a better car, XYZ thing. Well, now you're diehard, for Lexus. I mean, you're still under Toyota, but it's you're a Lexus owner. But in trying to make yourself, more niche by saying I own XYZ a car, you have now joined this club of sorts of Lexus owners. I mean, you see this, I will once again, for the 9,000th time, go back to social media. You have people, influencers, like, for instance, Kylie Jenner. And now that entire image, to go back to Eric's point about what young women see in social media and just in the world in general, there's a very trendy look of what people should look like. But even when you enter that aspect of things, now we just have, photocopies of one single celebrity. Now that's almost sort of a cult or sort of, a group. So I think to speak to the consumerism also of it, you can easily talk about Amazon. I think that, that has made it very easy to isolate ourselves, where you can literally order anything at your fingertips. You can get it. I mean, you don't have to go anywhere to get anything anymore. Or if you do, you can go to a giant supermarket, which has a monopoly on every single mom and pop store, in the nation and in the world at this point, and get everything that you need. So you further are able to isolate yourself just by gaining your basic needs. And that is, I think that's scary. And I think that that's something that we have to be cognizant in combating, because if we keep going down this road, we are just going to continue to isolate ourselves, not only ideologically, being in an echo chamber, but also just in the way that we obtain the things we need to survive.
Yeah, I think we're getting into the concept of like the hyper personalization. I agree. You did a great job touching on this, and Eric, you kind of talked about like the beginnings of this with the cigarette ads. Yeah, which is the hyper personalization of advertisement. For instance, like, we all know our phones listen to us and then show us things we were talking about the day before. So I'd like to explore that more if anyone has any more thoughts.
I do, but I'll go next.
Yeah, I would kind of like to wrap up what she was saying, but I'm glad that you do. So thinking more about this consumerism, stewing on it and listening to you guys, just think about the highly individualistic, the highly atomized, socially atomized culture of consumerism that we have curated for ourselves. Do you guys ever go to Collectivo, the coffee shop?
On a couple of occasions.
Yeah.
Great. You've heard of it?
I don't go. My wife does more of that than I do.
Great. Do you were all aware that it used to be called Altera?
Yeah.
Great. Do we know the term Collectivo and what it means? So I found this out while they were rebranding and renaming themselves, and I found this kind of fascinating. Collectivos, these buses that are used in Latin America, They said on their packaging that it creates a sense of culture and community that everybody shares because everybody they rely on these things to get them from place to place. They talk to each other while they're there. It is something that connects the entire community. Compare that to us. We have more individualistic cars than any other nation. Many of our households actually have more than one car per person living in the household. You brought up Amazon. We don't have to meet each other in the grocery store anymore. Grocery stores are actually closing all around America. You can have that stuff curated and delivered to you. You don't have to associate with anybody anymore to be able to buy your groceries. You can start traveling down this road actually quite a ways. The amount of things that we purchase specifically for our own self-interest and the way that marketing has latched on to marketing towards our own specific self-interest and the individual nature of those self-interests, I actually think it's incredibly scary. There are places, they're called co-housing cultures or co-housing units, where they will share one kitchen. It's like 6 households, and they all share one kitchen. They also usually share a garden. They have applications for you to join the community because they will be interacting with you that much. We say that we have tribalism in America. We have created a very strange, warped, rebranded version of tribalism. Tribalism, you said it was militaristic in nature. I don't see it that way. I see that becoming a consequence of some tribes that don't associate well enough with each other, that are struggling for their own goods and resources and services at the expense of another. But the way that I see tribalism is actually that you define yourself by the tribe that you were raised with. And if you think of it that way, if you are raised in a nuclear family or even a broken family, you have already yourself been segmented to social atomization at a level that is very different from other parts in the world that are actually raised by a community. And we have built buildings, and we have built products, and we have built an entire market structure to supply this level of social atomization and actually even further it.
I actually wanted to build on Grant's point about Hitler as the embodiment of I think that is a and I'm going back to consumerism very quickly. I think that is an extreme example again, which it's that proves the point. Because Hitler, the infamous documentary about Hitler was called Triumph of the Will, and he's seen as, strangely enough, both the embodiment of the ideal of German national destiny, and therefore collective, but also the individual who triumphs by the power of his will. And he's both of these things at the same time as the embodiment of this national movement. And I think, like you were saying, in our consumer context, we have a really, it's almost comically warped version of this. When we get down to that, we make almost little personality cults out of celebrities in consumerism, not just the obvious, tabloid kinds of cults of personality, but think about some of the products you've seen celebrities hype. Like Brett Favre sells a hair grooming instrument. What in the world does Brett Favre at playing football have to do with men's hair care? And it, you can go down a list of this that it's that weird like duality where his triumph of the will or his individual ability that is then used as the embodiment of sort of a vaguely masculine ideal, or something that's really gender neutral, really doesn't have any moral qualities attached to it, like shaving your face, is now seen as part of this this moral ideal, and it sells products. And it's again, it's that other extreme, because I was talking about incoherent, shifty, back and forth policies, and now this is kind of the opposite extreme, where all of it gets tied together, except in either a really, really destructive way, like in Nazi Germany, or a really almost cartoonish example, like we see with consumerism. But it's basically the same trend, I would say.
Well, you are definitely right when you say that that's an extreme example. When I brought up Hitler, and that's the point, because I would say that kind of rise is an example of when social atomization has gone to extreme lengths, that it stops being social atomization as any one of us would recognize it. Because at the core, when you have that kind of ability to kind of ferment your own personality, to form your own identity, and by extension choose your own path or destiny, or however you want to word it, that serves as an example of you having that freedom to do so. And that's, I would say, is a controlled form of social atomization, the fact that you still have that. However, when everyone shares the same kind of interest, that is their individual one, because it's rooted in such things as look at their families, whatnot. If their families are suffering, that's something that's individual to them, but they're feeling the same effects overall, or they're feeling the effects of the same overall issues, and thus it's led them to congregate in this kind of way, awaiting to be subverted by some kind of external force, like a tyrant, like Hitler. And to your point concerning the kind of cult of personality surrounding a lot of marketing, I think that it's like I said earlier, where that's almost like the more harmless form of pandering. We might all find it annoying. I don't know if I'm the only one who shares in that opinion of that kind of pandering, yeah. And there are real consequences in terms of the parasocial relationship that us as everyday Americans and people in the West in general have towards public figures and celebrity. One can look at social atomization, whether it be a force for good or for ill, in my view anyway, as on a spectrum. And that spectrum, I would say you could rank that on how much does it allow someone to keep their own individual identity.
All right. So one other thing I want to move into as far as potential causes is the concept of excess and vices. So
What Could you say that one more time?
Excess and vices. So addictions, things like that.
Access?
Excess. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I've seen enough documentaries and pieces about the dangers of, say, gambling addictions as a good example, where it's that weird cross patch of individualism and collectivism, where they're all participating in a collective endeavor, but it's this truly unhealthy form of individual competition at the same time. Not like in good sporting things, because in this case, oftentimes there are like 3 nerds who have figured out how to game the whole system, and they make all the winnings. And it carries like all the negative properties of all that we associate with gambling, because it draws in these addicts with the continual promise not only of making money so much, but just I can beat the master, and whatever other sort of mental ideas these people have that drive them to this self-destructive behavior. And then it's marketed, of course, in this super what's the right term for this? It's glamorous. It's almost like you get to be part of the NFL or part of the MLB, when of course that's ludicrous. You're just a person on a computer or on your phone pitching. And I'm not saying this is inherently harmful, but I think there is a bit of irresponsibility in the way that it is broadly marketed, and that the companies take no responsibility for the sorts of ways that they draw in people who should not. They do no filtering in their systems. They offer people no counseling when they fall into addictions. It's just a very toxic and again, self-contradictory sort of enterprise.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an interesting concept, and I don't think that it's one that many people would immediately consider talking about social atomization. I think that once again, this just goes back to the striving to be hyper unique, if you will. I know someone who was raised in a wealthy, well-off family. Basically had the world at his fingertips. His brother had gone on to get his PhD, XYZ, a thing, and he always fell in the shadow of his brother. And I think that a lot of people, and especially there's statistics and there have been studies done upon this, that especially affluent young white males feel like they are just going through the motions of life, that there is going to be, at the end of the day when they die, nothing that truly set them apart. They did everything right. They took the right classes in high school, they went to the right colleges, they got the right degree, they got married, they had kids, they lived and they died. And in this person that I'm speaking of, their standpoint was that this really drove them into a very unhealthy place mentally, and where they found other people who felt like they lived in the shadows of others, lived like they did not feel like they could live up to what society would want for them, it turned him to addiction. And thank God he's gotten clean since, but he found community in that addiction. And I feel like a lot of people see that glamorization not only through just feeling like they're an outcast, but and finally feeling like they have their people, but also through like what we watch on TV. I've even from the same friend, he's got people who are much more naive than him who watch things like Euphoria, and now they're like, oh, I really want to try drugs. I mean, it's insane, it's ludicrous. But if you actually look at it, I mean, we are prioritizing these sort of behaviors, and we are saying that they are okay, and we're not pushing back against them, and we're simply glamorizing them. And I think that it all harkens back to just everyone screaming, listen to me, look at me, because I'm so unique, or because I need to be so unique. And I think it's an interesting paradox and dichotomy. And I think that it's just something that isn't really easily explained. And I don't think that we truly understand the entire depth of it.
Uh, and I think that you made a good point when you brought up how in things like arts and entertainment and popular media, how people will take a look at what's around them, and it might lead them to if they're they might be naive, or they might be curious about something, and they might try this behavior that could lead them down a path of destruction. And I think that that's ultimately it serves a point as to why it is important for us to maintain the idea of personal responsibility, as I would say anyway, for my part, that is a self-interest of ours, to maintain that kind of personal responsibility, to stay on the path of least destruction. The reason being is that if you want things to be regulated, where, say, if there's some kind of addictive product that's being marketed, or some kind of service that's marketed, and if people do get hooked on it in a nefarious way, and they might need that kind of counseling and whatnot, well, the question then stands, who is going to provide that kind of counseling or that kind of aid for those afflicted? Because if it's the organizations themselves, or the company themselves, or what have you, that put out this kind of product, the fact that they do have a addicted customer base coming back hooked, means that they have no vested interest, when it comes down to lining their own pockets, in fixing the problem themselves. And I think that's why it's up to individual consumers to pursue that kind of two forms of their own interests, that being the one of responsibility to stay away from these kinds of products if it could potentially become a burden for them, but also to not give the power to these kinds of companies to keep abusing them through things like addiction. And by not giving them power, in the world we live in, one might say money is power. Thus, the kind of power you don't give them is your money. You keep them out of your pocketbook, essentially. Um, uh, it's ultimately, it comes down to a game of problem solution, where a problem is manufactured. These companies, these soulless collectives, if you will, have no interest in solving it. So now it has to be up to us to pursue that goal ourselves of solving it by not even playing their game.
I think my connection between social atomization and maybe vices or excesses is possibly a little different. We've talked about maybe addictions and narcotics, but we haven't really talked about loneliness. And I see that as being the biggest driver for truly disastrous drug use. Sure, marketing companies have something to do with it. I do find it very interesting that when the tobacco industry lost the lawsuit against them, they had to pay for the advertisements to try to get people not to smoke. I think it's just hilarious, actually. It is ironic. And I don't even think that those advertisements were necessarily a bad job, but the issue is that the companies were allowed to continue doing everything that they were doing otherwise, with really only putting a warning label on it. But my point is, really, it's highly different than that. What's very interesting to me about, say, alcohol, is most of the commercials will show people together that are enjoying a social event, and this social event is aided with the introduction or continuation of alcoholic consumption. And yet, the people that we typically find are the real abusers of alcohol, the ones that we focus on as, this is what not to do, are those that drink alone. It's a known warning for people who are starting to drink, and for people who are afraid of becoming alcoholics, that when you start drinking alone, something has shifted in your relationship with alcohol. And I believe that that's because alcohol, in its essence, is a depressant. And when you start drinking alone, you are you're seeking something that you're not finding somewhere else. You're chasing this feeling that you used to have the last time that you had a great time drinking alcohol. And the most likely scenario for that is a social experience. So when we talk about this social atomization, again, my definition of social atomization is isolation. It is social isolation. And when you are socially isolated and when you feel lonely, you look to things usually that are going to ease that pain. The last thing I'd like to say about this, I think that humans in general, along with many other animals, but really humans, are very comfort-driven. Almost everything can be distilled down to the sense of whether we are trying to find some comfort to something that is otherwise harming us. And so we build these cars that wrap us in a cocoon of an isolated climate. We even have climate control in these vehicles. Again, we curate that experience for us. But nobody can know what is most comfortable for us than ourselves. And that's actually not necessarily true. Sometimes there are caretakers that know our needs better than we do. But the point really is that they have to know you at such a level that it's a special bond. And much of what we do to try to make purchases is to actually combat this very uncomfortable natural thing, which is loneliness and isolation. So this thing that we keep wrapping ourselves back around into, I think we've been dancing with it. You started it, you've mentioned it, is that social atomization seems to have this relationship with collectivism. Now, why is that? We are fighting back on loneliness. We realize that we have isolated ourselves to some extent, and in order to fix that, in order to solve that discomfort, we look for something that we can connect to with another person, whether it be a razor that Brett Favre uses, because I know that that's part of my tribe, whether it be a despot or whether that be social media, finding other people that have similar views to us. We are solving a need that we ourselves have created by creating the social atomized society that we live in today.
All right, so I actually want to go to break here, and then we'll transition to potential mitigations and solutions that everyone has thoughts about.
So this thing about Tinder, I think that Tinder is, and really all dating apps, but actually Tinder might be one of the best examples here. I think that online dating apps are a great example of social atomization being used by the market itself, by the market kind of pandering, as you guys were saying, to the realization that they have developed that humans don't really coexist the way that they used to, and we can actually use that to play to a form of profitability. And what I think is interesting about the case is almost everybody complains about Tinder. Almost everybody makes fun of Tinder. And also, many people have those complaints because at one time they used it. They tried it out. They know what it's about. They met people on it. I have a partner I met there. We've been together for 4 years. And this leads me really to an interesting point. Is there solutions for social atomization that are actually built out of social atomization? And we've actually kind of been circling, as I just mentioned, we've kind of been circling around this for a while. It goes back to maybe my earliest statement about this, which is ebb and flows. Almost nothing in the world can stay completely stationary for an incredibly long amount of time. I look at history as really more of a pendulum with constant disturbances. And when you have social atomization get to a point where people are actually feeling this innate loneliness, this irrecoverable loneliness, they're going to start looking for solutions, and some of those solutions might be kind of wretched. But also some of those solutions might just be marketed to them to get them out of their atomization and back into the world. So we have meetup.com. We've got, I'm not saying that meetup.com is the solution, but we do have a force that is coming back out to try to meet people where they are. Campaigns are now known to be more grassroots than they had been in decades, where we are actually trying to reach people, and by we, I just mean the collective royal we of campaign managers are trying to reach people at their homes. They will literally walk door to door, and they throw money at this. There are other solutions that are maybe more institutional. There are other solutions that might be more on a broad scale. But the point is that I think that we can look to some examples that we already have where we can pull ourselves out of this mess little by little.
I only because I have a direct follow-up on that online dating point. I actually met my wife on christianmingle.com. Oh, yeah. No. Actually, I want people to laugh about it because the irony is that ever since then, I have now whittled it down to defining us as the only real success story I'm aware of.
You're probably right, Arno.
Yeah, no. And it's like, and it kind of gets to, and you seem to have the same attitude about Tinder where it's like,
Oh, it's horrible. I have so many complaints.
It's literally problem solution personified. They just want you to keep coming back and throwing money at better results.
Yeah.
I gotta jump in here and say this, but it's like what they should do is good shower thought here is instead of showing your profile or not, it should just show everyone who sees your profile how many times you've uninstalled and then reinstalled the app and show everyone who's truly losing their mind. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that kind of thing.
There's a solution. There we go. Social atomization. We're done. There we go.
We did it.
Figuring it out. We got it.
And I actually think that's the perfect, if again almost cartoonish example of one of the two poles that I see as the danger that we're facing. And in America, with everything, we are very schizophrenic in our tradition and our heritage. And on this issue in particular, you've got extreme individualism on one hand, extreme collectivism on the other hand. And we've had bouts of both, and I think the same thing, because this nation has existed in this unique, that geographically it's helped a lot that we're separated by oceans. Culturally, we broke away, and then we're very self-consciously shunning and rebelling against that mainstream European culture that we were derived from, but still managed to hang on to enough of it to just be a mess. Our policies, the reason we can never get any policy right, in my opinion, is basically because one party comes in, rules, gets its stuff out, the next party comes in, tries to work against everything the previous party did, and it goes in an endless cycle like that, and we end up with these bizarre hodgepodge policies that are neither one thing nor the other, and they end up oftentimes being nothing at all. And it's the same thing here, where I mean, online dating, again, it's cartoonishly goofy, but it's like we all make fun of it, but 2 out of the 4 people in this group are technically success stories. And I think that's very American of us. It's like we hate the thing that we use. It's like we love to hate the thing we hate to love. And that the fact that makes no logical sense, I think, sums up where we're at. Like, we need to somehow come to a point where we're both self-aware and consistent, and somewhere in the middle, like where I think we've kind of been angling towards this all along. We need individual identity, but we also need a sense of shared responsibility and shared heritage. And I mean, exactly how we arrive there, I don't know. I think it's going to honestly take a lot more. It's going to take a lot. It's going to change an entire culture like that takes generations and continuous activism and pressure and cultural, popular culture transformation. It would have to be a movement. And I don't even know that there's enough awareness that the need is there to start a movement. So I don't mean to end on a hopeless note, but maybe it's call it a call to action.
So now as far as you mentioned that this idea of moderation, well, that precisely is just that. As with social atomization, by definition being the pursuit of self-interests, one could come to the conclusion that it is within your self-interest to seek out a community of some kind, albeit within reason. Thus, I would reason that would be the logical conclusion. Self-atomization is almost a problem that solves itself, provided that the motivation is there.
Thought you were going on. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you there. No, and I think, like, just to go back to, just the comical nature of, dating apps. I mean, you've got, Hinge, where their slogan is the dating app designed to be deleted. So, I mean, in a way, and I think that I'm glad Eric gets such a kick out of this. I do too. No, but I think to go back to the point of, like, the dichotomy of, like, social atomization is that, within that, I mean, we can use social atomization to actually make something that counteracts that, essentially. So, for instance, I found, I'm very interested and very involved in my chess club at my university. I found that through social media. I found that through playing chess by myself for 2 years during the pandemic. And now it has, for me, created an entire social circle. So, I mean, it was kind of the chess app designed to be deleted in that case, if you want to go along those lines. So I think that something else too is just simply our behavior concerning how we interact with one another when we make it a point to put down our phones when someone else is talking, when we make it a point to not have to put everything that we do on Snapchat. And I think that, the older generations, they, harp on us very legitimately, and they have kind of a claim to being like, God, get your stinking faces out of those phones and just enjoy these memories. Remember how it made you feel, and you don't have to take a picture of every damn thing that you see that is interesting, because really, one, nobody cares but you and what you want that persona of yourself to seem. But I think if we truly try to, just within ourselves in a grassroots movement, try to shift our focus from our entire lives or social media to being social media is part of our lives. And I think concerning politics, I think concerning the ebb and flow, something that I certainly don't believe I coined the phrase, and if I did, then I coined it. But I think that truly the pendulum swings in kind.
I like that we've kind of reached this stage, but I'm also afraid of it. It sounds to me like Grant feels that this problem might fix itself, and I know that there's an overgeneralization. It sounds to me like Gray believes that this is an ebb and flow, and we're going to flow on back, and I know that I'm somebody who actually kind of said that myself, that we've gotten ourselves into this mess because it's a pendulum swing, and we'll get ourselves out because of a pendulum swing. But that scares me. I don't think that we've reached the pinnacle of social atomization. I actually, I think that we're scratching the surface. A movie that I don't think gets nearly enough credit is WALL-E. And you've got these people that are sitting around just watching their own stuff. What do they call it when they don't have to work, right? They're just sitting there in their little spaceship. They don't have to do anything, so they don't. They've got everything curated for them, and they don't really have to interact personally with another human. And this is exactly what you were talking about earlier, but what I'm saying is that we still are not there. You do still have to go into that shoe store and get fitted if you really want to run a marathon. There is something special about getting a bike personally fit to your body. And sure, automation might take some of that up, and that's a crazy thing that we haven't even talked about in this entire conversation of social atomization. AI is going to learn how to control our personalities better than we might actually know how to control our personalities. We were talking about police a little earlier, and my fear of the police is that they actually will get defunded, but in a larger way that most people don't talk about. We could defund the police pretty quickly by putting in breathalyzers and speed controls into our cars the second that they're sold. That's just one area. We would never need the highway police to be sitting there on the highway anymore if every car required it. And that would, again, social atomize us to the point where we don't have the same fear of police because we're not interacting with them at the same level. All of these moves towards robotics is actually a move towards social atomization, and we have not even scratched the surface of robotics. So, no, I don't believe that this problem is going to solve itself. And because I don't believe that, I actually align myself a little better with what you said. A movement. I've been writing this little bit for a couple years now. I have severe cognitive dissonance in our current society. I wasn't born in this country. I'm a citizen of the country because I was told that I was. If I were to try to renounce my citizenship, that would be a hard process, and then I'd be an alien in this world. It is very difficult to find re-citizenship in another country, and that would be something that I would at that point have to take on. Why am I talking about all this? Because I did not sign up for the laws that we currently use. I also recognize that our government specifically built a system that disproportionately gives voices to those that are more powerful than myself, and I know that this is a shared experience with a lot of people that are not considered to be an elite. And if that is the case, then it is harder and harder to create collective action to change these things to look more like the reality that I wish that I was living. This creates social atomization for myself. I feel alone in this instance where I express these thoughts, and I grow up this way every day, or I wake up this way every day. Now, in that moment, I imagine a place that is not like that, and you could even call it a utopia. And I've written hundreds of pages into this little utopia, and it would be quite different. The co-housing that I talked about earlier, I do think that that's actually a very reasonable solution. I think that the way that we actually build living spaces today is incredibly dangerous. I would like to shift away from that. I think that the way that we look at the planet as something to reap benefits out of, as something that we can just take from, is in itself backwards and actually social atomizes ourselves from nature itself. And I think that to segment ourselves away from nature in such a substantial way that we have already is itself a distance that we have created. So, without taking up much more time, I have imagined a different world. And I think the biggest fear for me is that it is simply an imagination. I don't believe that it can happen. I do believe that robots are coming, and I'm scared.
Are we moving to final thoughts?
Yeah, we can do.
Okay.
Do you want that to be your final thought, Ellen, or do you have?
Okay, you're done. Okay. I guess my final thought then will be something of an epilogue, because if anyone knows what I do here, they know it's connected to religion and may find it interesting. I haven't mentioned anything about Jesus or the Bible yet. And I guess in terms of this subject in particular, as with a lot of subjects, I would kind of make this sort of an ironic dual sort of consideration, because obviously Christian, you had originally wondered if maybe I was going to argue that decline in church attendance contributes to this, and it might to a degree. And you know, the traditional evangelical, right-wing evangelical kind of idea that the loss of Christian values and Christian heritage leads to all these sorts of problems. I would say it could. I mean, having a common identity and having a shared value system can certainly aid in such things. And I guess from my own spiritual perspective, having a proper relationship with God can certainly help with our relationship with one another. But there's a flip side to that too, where once you socialize religion, you give people this unerring absolute certainty that every conviction and idea of theirs is the will of God. And that can be an that can be the most dangerous place for a culture to arrive at. And so I guess the answer as to whether more Christianity would make things, social atomization, better is yes, no. I mean, it's probably the same with almost any idea any of us have presented. It's a matter of how a tool is used or how a thing is properly appropriated by people and a society individually.
So, as far as any logical conclusions with regards to social atomization, you guys are right about something very prudent about this. You mentioned the notion that it has to be a movement of sorts rather than it's fixing itself. Now, I would not say that this is necessarily a problem that fixes itself that simply. It fixes itself in the sense that it provides its own solution, that being that what will lead to the happier, healthier society would be one in which people will pursue what will benefit them, and altogether, collectively, people pursue their own interests, leading to the proper balance that we would need. You would have, when people are fulfilling themselves this way, they're a more fulfilled people. There's less of a need to turn to more radical forms of social atomization then.
I guess my closing thought would just be that it is a culture shift that, needs to occur. I think that, and when I say simple, do not mistake it for it being easy, because, it's simple to build a skyscraper, but it certainly isn't easy, right? But I think it surrounds the grassroots movement of simply just trying to, when you are in a social setting, trying to unplug, trying to disconnect from social media, from your device, and actually, when you're present, be present. I have a professor that just drills this into our heads, like, when you're here, be here. Like, here. And I think my closing thought is that there actually was a bit of this grassroots movement. I don't know if any of you remember, and I mean, I'm 21 years old, so what, about 15 years ago on, I think Disney Channel would have once in a while in the summer, they would have a hour-long, like, tech break or something, or like an unplug break, and it's like, go outside and play. And then, on those sorts of days, it's like, well, Disney Channel's not, what am I going to do? I guess I am going to have to go outside and play. And then, you'd go connect with your friends, or maybe, you do something in your own house, but later you could go and discuss, like, oh yeah, what did you do during, like, the Disney Channel, like, tech break? And that, in that way, was a very, like, micro form of, like, that culture shift. I mean, just even being children and just learning to enjoy taking a step back from that social atomization, whether or not, you linguistically are able to articulate that or not. I think just culturally, just little by little, I think that it could make an impact, and we can also move away from the very cynical view, no, I'm kidding, that has been presented. I think that, it's an option. I think that it begins with you, it begins with me, and it begins with us.
All right. So yeah, thanks for being here, guys. This is really enjoyable. Give yourselves a pat on the back. You did a really good job.
I like that you're the only one that took that class.
So my name is Alan Latazzi. I'm a double major in political science with an emphasis on theory, and conservation environmental science with an emphasis on water resources. The groups I've been affiliated with on campus have been the Lubar Entrepreneurship Center. I have a few business ideas. I'm a McNair Scholar. I am chair of the Green Fund Allocation and Mentorship Committee, which is in charge of allocating student funds to sustainable projects. And I'm a University Innovation Fellow, which is through the Stanford D School.
All right, so what do you identify as politically?
I would say that I am a forced Democrat. I would like to throw my support behind something like the Green Party. I don't associate myself with every one of the facets of their entity, but it's much closer to what I think the Democratic Party currently is, which is really a center-left.
All right, so the topic of this discussion coming up is going to be social atomization. What are your views and thoughts on that?
I've been pretty afraid of social atomization for a good deal of time. I think that it has permeated into our society in ways that are both talked about in a multitude of journalistic entries, books actually. It's definitely a thing that I think is real. I think it exists. I think that that scholars have acknowledged its existence. But again, I think at a worldly level, it's something that even though we have heard about, we are not really tackling, and we don't really confront the ramifications of. For me, on a more personal level, I graduated with 33 people from a town of 1,244, and my first job was milking cows. And in that community, I visited again maybe 2 years ago, and in that community, I got this sense that everybody there knows their place. And I don't even like that verbiage, but I guess that they feel a member of the community. And so if you have a broken car, there are probably 3 guys or gals that specialize in fixing that car. You know who to look for. If you want to play an instrument, there are 2 band directors in that city. Those are the people that you go to. They're the experts. There's 1 dentist, So everybody kind of has this role that they play, and everybody knows each other, and they interact in a level that I find to be very different from what you would experience in an urban setting in a larger city. I'm not saying that my current state reflects in urban environments and living in that specific manner, but really it does. That is what I'm saying. And that can be kind of scary, and I think that a lot of young adults are feeling that fear on a realistic level. Kind of some mild statistics that I know that when America was forming itself, there were kind of larger plantations and otherwise larger outfits where multiple families would live in one area. I do know that there were things like apartments as well and what have you, but ultimately a lot of the buildings that we find in Milwaukee and a lot of the Midwest, they are large Victorian homes. That's what we call them, right? Well, those Victorian homes, if you look back to their roots, they have slave quarters. That's literally what they were, servant quarters, if you want to call it that. And so the servants lived in the household and helped the people that actually owned that home, and that the people that owned that home themselves were parts of a usually multi-generational family that lived inside of that same building. And over these last 100 years, we've really transferred that living system into something entirely different, into a nuclear family. So we've kind of said this multi-generational thing that's got to go. We've got old people can go to nursing homes or wherever it is, and young people have to be out by 18. And that's that. And so that's our nuclear family model. And then over the last 20 years, maybe 30, we've transitioned from the nuclear family to more of I don't know. Are we even going to have kids? I don't. A lot of people question whether what do they call them? Antinatalists question whether there's actually value in producing more children to put on this planet with as much climate anxiety and whatever woes we have. So we have this declining reproduction rate. At the same time, over these last 30 or 40 years, we've had increased divorce rates. And what all of this leads to, and that's not even to mention the changing stratosphere of relationships in general. A lot of people are more timid about getting into a relationship, especially quickly. So you'll notice that a lot of people don't move in with each other right away. They don't live together for a while. So you start adding all this stuff up together, and what it amounts to at a municipal level, at a census taking level, is that we have more people living alone than we've ever had before. Brian McKibben, I think a fairly good author. He was a journalist before he wrote some books, but he wrote this book, Deep Economy, and in there he says we have more communicability than we've ever had, and we communicate worse than we ever have. And I've repeated that probably 100 times because I find it to be entirely true. I'm not great at texting back. I don't know very many people that are. And that's just one form of communication. I think that a lot of people don't communicate at a face-to-face level the way that they used to. I was talking with my partner yesterday, and she actually said that the face of retail sales have changed because people they're maybe not afraid, but they are timid about speaking in person with another person. They don't want to be confronted with the concept of what they're actually in the store for, having somebody help them find it rather than taking their own time and just generally interacting with them. And so social atomization, I guess, to wrap this all up, to me, has so many different facets. And if you really start pulling at all the strings that intercorrelate to this, it can be a little terrifying.
All right, well said. So what do you expect people who politically are different from you, what do you expect their views on social atomization to be?
Well, to be pretty blunt about political difference from me, you know, if I'm to agree that I am a leftist, a lot of people on the left are experiencing social atomization differently than a lot of people on the right. And that is because a lot of people on the left are the ones that I was just talking about. They're the ones that are living in individualistic homes and that have such climate anxiety that they don't want to reproduce. And and somehow are, I don't know, oddly more independent. I don't know where that factors in, but the point is that the left, these feelings, these fears of mine, I actually think are more generally placed in my political camp. On the right, there are so many studies and so many statistics that go along with those studies to show that there is a major correlation between religion and conservatism, and there's other correlations between religion and reproduction rates. We can look at that as anti-abortion. We can look at that as the actual amount of children that are in a household of a religious home versus a non-religious one. So there's these actual direct correlations there. Now, I don't know that means that they have multi-generational homes. I don't have any statistics on that. Haven't looked that up, but I do know that the nuclear family is much more common in a Republican, conservative, or right-leaning household. And I guess the more scholarly way to put that is traditional family values, right? So that's something that Melinda Cooper talks about as being correlated with neoliberalism and the right. So I would imagine that members of the conservative parties, whether it's libertarian or Republican, I would imagine that they would more closely align with the idea of a nuclear family. And because of that, I would imagine that they don't actually have as much experience with social atomization. And I think that maybe to wrap that up, there are good things to see on both spectrums, both political spectrums. And if I were to align myself with a positive for the right, it's that some of those traditional family values are highly respectable. It's good to want to raise children that can go out into the world and do good things. It's good to have a positive outlook on the future in that way. On the right, you'll see a lot of people that have a family meal at the dinner table. These are good traditional values. I have nothing wrong with that. And I believe that that's probably the best defense against social atomization. So what's interesting is that the left are typically the people that are recognizing social atomization more so than the right, and they're also the people that don't really seem to have the solution for it.
All right, Alan, thanks for coming in. Looking forward to the discussion.
You bet.
My name is Gray O'Leary Hasmonic. I am a senior studying elementary education, and I am involved with College Democrats on campus.
So what do you identify as politically?
Liberal, but more moderate than liberal.
All right, so the topic of discussion today is social atomization. What are your initial thoughts, feelings on that?
I think that it definitely has a point. I think that especially over the pandemic, we've seen how technology has really not brought us much closer together. Personally, I was one of the people who largely stayed home during the pandemic because, quite frankly, I was terrified until the vaccines came out. I have an immunocompromised mother, so I was worried about that. And while I tried to connect with my peers and friends over Zoom, over FaceTime, just over social media in general, I just feel like a lot of it fell flat and fell short. And even though we had the opportunity to connect, and even now after the pandemic, and even beforehand, for that matter, I still feel like technology has really gotten in the way of our socialization, even though in some ways it's aided it largely, but in other ways I think it's been a detriment.
All right, well said. So what are your initial expectations of people who differ from you politically? How do you think their views differ or are similar to yours on the topic of social atomization?
I'm really not sure. I think that personally from my standpoint, I have actually shifted my views more to center over the last 6 months or so, just with gaining greater exposure to a variety of viewpoints, topics, and speakers. So I think I believe possibly from a more liberal perspective, they would push back against social atomization, thinking that, well, no, social media has brought us so much closer together. It's allowed us to connect with people that we never could have connected with prior or connected with seldom prior. I think maybe more on the Republican or conservative side of things, they might say, yeah, like this is something that has not been great for our mental health. I think that might be the pushback there, but I'm really not sure.
All right, awesome. Well, thanks for coming in. We look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
My name is Eric Slawich, aka the pen guy, for people know me as that. That wasn't my idea. That was actually something that became a popular phenomenon years ago. I'm sort of an unofficial missionary here. I was a student from '02 to '07, and in addition to the main missionary stuff, I also oversee a Christian organization that is not yet registered. We're trying to get registered. It's called Logos Christian Fellowship. That's not my main thing. That's something else that kind of happens around here. Most of the time I'm outside or inside hanging out with friends.
All right, so what do you identify as politically?
Well, the term I had coined for myself is pragmatic libertarian, meaning that in principle, according to the principles laid down in the New Testament, I think that the government's role is basically law and order and basic justice, for murder, theft, rape, things like that. But I'm sympathetic to government social programs, both because I was raised as a liberal Democrat, but also because I see God using such things to bring about good. Whether I'm going to say that endless deficit spending is necessarily the way to go, I don't know, but I kind of operate on the principle of something's better than nothing when we have a crisis, so yeah.
So the topic we're going to be talking about during the discussion is social atomization. What are your initial views on this topic? Do you have anything you'd like to say about it? What your perspective is?
I am really inclined to see technology as the primary factor, just because having grown up in the 90s, when TV was the most technology there was, and even desktop computers were just becoming a thing. This thing, every day I see people outside walking glued to their phones, and I can't help but think how broken and dysfunctional since that becomes so much of how you relate to people, that doesn't feel real or natural. I have a smartphone. I'm basically dependent on it because it took over the role of my computer. But I guess in my mind, that's the main factor. And it's it wasn't an ideological thing. It wasn't something anyone did deliberately. It's just sort of the natural way that technology develops. Back in the 90s, none of this existed, and kids still function as kids. We had, we played on playgrounds and sat around lunch tables, and no one was looking at a phone. So I can feel the difference going in the union cafeteria and stuff if I were to think about it.
So what do you expect the views of people who differ from you politically to be in regards to the topic social atomization?
I've discovered that there are a few issues. Criminal justice reform is one of them, where there seems to be a bipartisan consensus. Now, people on the right, maybe I would expect to put a little more blame on social media companies as sort of deliberately manufacturing this, and people on the right tend to see things in a very kind of conspiratorial sort of perspective to various degrees. I'm not saying everyone on the right buys into QAnon or anything, but it's a very culture war mentality. Same thing on the left, but I think it's more pronounced on the right, and so I would expect people on the right, I wouldn't at all be surprised if they thought this was a deliberate plot on the part of social media companies to break down traditional American values on the one hand and to somehow or other target conservatives on the other hand, because anytime you mention social media and conservative in the same sentence, those two, they're always thinking that the social media companies are after them.
All right, what about people to the left of you?
Honestly, it may not be all that different, because people in the more progressive camp, well, they tend to be more suspicious of big corporations as just as corporations. So I don't know that they would see it as a form of censorship as much as it's just out of control, capitalistically driven societal transformation. That maybe they will see it as a conspiracy of sorts, but more of a one for people to gain, like the heads of the corporations to get rich, more than they're trying to censor one side of the aisle or the other.
All right. Well, yeah, Eric, thanks for coming in. We look forward to the discussion.
Cool. All right.
Hello, my name is Grant Klusman, and I am a history major here at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and I am affiliated with Americans for Prosperity.
All right, so what do you identify as politically?
Politically, I identify as a libertarian realist, bordering at times on paleo-libertarian.
Okay, so the topic of the discussion is going to be social atomization. What are your initial thoughts, feelings, and takes on that?
As far as social atomization is concerned, I feel like it's, as a concept, is something that there's basically no escaping, regardless of how ruggedly individualistic someone might identify as, or how collectivist someone might be in nature, because ultimately people can go it alone within kind of their own worldview, social in terms of socio-political terms. They can do that based on their own wants or needs, ultimately their interests at the end of the day, or sometimes because these self-interests that people hold align with that of others, they go on and they form communities based around that. Even though these are collectives, though, these collectives are made up of the individuals and their individual wants and needs that so happen to be shared. And ultimately, these kinds of communities exist in a larger community with other organizations, entities, and even at times nations, and defense pacts, trade agreements, you name it. These have their own self-interests, and that's why these communities have formed around this. And following that, the kinds of collectivization that we see, it only gets larger and on a grander scale, because then you get into the realm of when it transcends even borders themselves, when nations and realist foreign policy, oftentimes nations act in their own self-interest, and according to a lot of realists one might talk to, nations have a tendency to behave when they act on their own self-interest and what benefits them rather than the overall international community necessarily, although sometimes when nations or organizations have shared interests, though, and they come together, we could see them behave that way as well, because they find that this kind of community building is beneficial for all parties involved, and it suits the needs and interests of everyone.
All right. So, what do you expect the views of people who are politically different than you to be in regards to social atomization? Are they the same? How do you think they'll differ? X, Y, Z.
That's the thing with social atomization, is that I think there's no denying how inescapable it is, because it is something that transcends ideology itself. They say that philosophy is upstream from politics itself. So no matter what, I think that one can come to the conclusion that though they might exist within collectives of people who might leave to the wayside their own specific individual wants or needs, at least in the moment, still, however, they have come to the conclusion of joining these kinds of collectives or organizations or communities, if you will, because the fact that's just that, their self-interests. And it's for that reason that they have decided it would be best to community build and then coexist in that way rather than just keep to themselves. And on the other foot, for someone who might identify as ruggedly individualist as they come, even then, their very nature and their very way of life is basically a shining example of social atomization, because of the fact that someone who has chosen to kind of remain out of any kind of label or any kind of specific faction or philosophy, it's essentially a tacit acknowledgement of the fact that they exist within their own interests rather than any kind of larger entity.
All right, Grant. Well, thanks for coming in, and we look
Thank
forward
you.
to the discussion.
Appreciate it.